Hi everyone, in today's episode I want to show you how I've built the base for this greenhouse that I'm standing in. Now, whenever you're going to build a greenhouse, the decision of foundation is one that's going to come up quite quickly. So, firstly, you can do concrete. I decided against that just because, number one, I didn't want to pour concrete into otherwise good soil, and number two, it is kind of semi-permanent. So if someone that buys the house from me in future wants to move it, and there's this concrete slab in the middle of the garden, it just feels odd. Like I just didn't want to do it in that way. And the second one, which is timber, or more specifically sleepers. There's a lot of advice online against using sleepers for raised beds because of the chemicals that is used to treat it, that leaches into the soil and is taken up possibly by the vegetables, and it's not good for you. So I definitely didn't want to use it for the base of the greenhouse right next to the plants that we're going to eat. And then that's how I came to plastic lumber. So it's recycled plastic. It comes in the same dimensions as normal timber. And as you'll see in the video, it was very, very easy to work with. Now, there are two things that I am not covering in this video. The one is how to build the actual greenhouse itself. The internet is full of instructions on how to do that. The manufacturers have instructions on how to do that, so that's not in this video. And then the second one, you'll hear me talking about no-dig gardening, which is just the method of gardening that we decided to use in this garden. The main principle is that you really look after your soil as if it's a living organism, and you treat it with care and you don't disturb it, and over years it becomes more and more healthy and better to grow in. Don't use any chemicals. There's very little weeding, but if you want to learn more about it, the best place to start is with Charles Dowding. He's here in the UK, absolute mastermind on the whole topic, and beautiful rabbit hole that is no-dig gardening. So please check him out. I'll also put links to all the things that I use down in the description below, so go and check that out. Let's see how I did it.
The first step was to decide where the greenhouse should go and to clear that space before I could start building. Ideally, we would have preferred to tuck the greenhouse away in that side corner there, but by its very nature, a greenhouse needs maximum sunlight, so we had to take this into account and move it a little bit away from the back fence so it could get as much morning light as possible. Once done, I moved on to measuring out the length of plastic. To make sure I got it 100% right, I used the base of the actual greenhouse to measure each piece rather than a tape measure. This is just a general tip for when you are cutting something. If the material you are cutting should be the exact same length as something else, and you can lay that something else directly alongside the material you are cutting, it is almost always better to do that rather than to rely on a tape measure. Here I am just using a DIY saw guide and my circular saw to make sure I cut the end square, but that is just one way of doing it. The important thing is just to make sure that these ends are cut square, whichever way you prefer to do it. Once I had all 4 lengths of plastic cut to size, I placed them in as good a square as I could possibly do by eye. You'll notice each of the corners are supported by an offcut of plastic or a paver. This is just to give me a semi-solid surface to work from when I'm squaring up each corner and screwing it all together. Here I'm constructing the first corner. At this point, you don't need to worry about getting it exactly square yet. That'll come later. The only thing I'm making sure of is getting the tops of the 2 pieces to be flush to one another. To help get this absolutely right, I use these little plastic shims to lift the lower of the 2 pieces until I'm 100% happy that they are flush. The fasteners I'm using here are 120mm wafer head screws, and they are designed for applications like decking and roofing and landscaping, all outdoor kind of stuff. Looking at this plastic, I don't believe you are meant to screw directly into the head ends if you are planning to put any load on it. But since these screws are only to help keep the base square initially, this isn't an issue you need to worry about for now. Next, I used the square to adjust each of the corners and used a temporary brace to fix each of the 4 angles in place. Speaking to people, I often find that they are hesitant to try a larger project like this one, just because they are a bit more intimidating. But as a general rule, the larger projects like these are often much more forgiving than the smaller ones. With the braces locking each of the 4 corners to 90 degrees, I can simply drag it close to its final position. I say close to its final position because I still have to drill holes for the concrete anchors, but it is easier to show you what I mean using this animation. Right, so here you can see our base laid out, and for the 2 horizontal sides, so this one and that one, the holes are offset just to the bottom of those, and for the two vertical sides the holes are offset just to the right. And what that means is I can now simply just pull this base a little bit to the left and a little bit down, and that way it lines up with the center of the holes perfectly. But I'll show you in the footage as well how that works. To drill the holes, I use this very basic handheld auger that I picked up from B&Q. I prefer this to digging a hole with a spade, as I wanted a deep hole but not necessarily a wide one, as this will require a lot more concrete to fill up, which is what I'm trying to prevent in the first place. And in softer soil like this, it is probably not much of an issue, but if it's more compacted soil, I think an auger will definitely be faster too. As I showed in the animation, once the holes are done, I can simply drag the whole frame across into its final position. A final check with an off-cut piece of plastic limber reference off the fence just to satisfy my OCD, and we are good as gold. Just to make the point again, up to now I have not used a tape measure at all. Now that our base is pretty much in its final location, the most important part of the job can be done, which is to level it. Depending on the topography of your site, you'll either need to lift some bits of your base or lower them until the whole thing is level. In my case, I had to drop down one corner especially just to get it right. There's no real technique to this. You simply just check and recheck the base at different points and make the small adjustments until you're happy that it is perfectly square. This really is the most important bit of the build, so take as much time as you need to get this 100% right. The next morning I started work on the anchors. For this I used standard 10mm threaded rod. You can buy these from any hardware store and they normally come in 1 meter lengths. This was more than I needed, so I simply chopped them in half using a small grinder. In order for the nuts to sit flush with the top of the plastic and not interfere with the base of the greenhouse, you have to countersink the holes deep enough. Now, another tip, when countersinking a hole with one of these flat drill bits, it is always better to first drill the larger hole and then the smaller through holes like I did here. If you do it the other way around, the tip of the bit has nowhere to center on and to dig into, and then it will jump all over the place like it's doing here. It isn't the end of the world in this case, but it is worth remembering, especially when you're doing much finer work than this. Now that you have a hole straight through the plastic, you can knock a rod through each of them. Remember to add these bottom nuts, as they will allow you to fine-tune the leveling once the concrete has cured, if necessary. Chances are you don't need it if you leveled your base correctly, but it is just an easy insurance policy to add in case you need it. With the anchor bolts in place, do one more final check to make sure you get it leveled perfectly. I know I'm laboring the point a little bit, but it is really that important. The base is either square and level or it isn't. If it isn't, then simply keep on adjusting it until it is before you move on to the next step. After double and triple checking the base, I then added the concrete. I used these very standard ready mix bags of concrete that you can pick up from any hardware store and use just under half a bag per hole. Now, for some reason I felt that the castings might be a little too lightweight, so I decided to add extra anchors into the ground. I didn't have any more threaded rod, so I decided to use bits of copper pipe I had in the workshop that came out of the floor when I had the heating redone. I simply flattened one side, hammered them into a new hole, and bolted them into the side of the plastic joist. Very easy, and they also won't rust because it's copper. Once dried, I removed the temporary braces and tidied up the soil level a bit, just as much as I can using a spade. Now that the base was finished, I could assemble the greenhouse on top of it. Most greenhouses like this are constructed in more or less the same way, and they all go together like an oversized Meccano set using bolts and aluminium lengths. Now, I don't know why I'm like this, although I do have some theories, but there is something wrong with me in that I struggle to ask for help and will end up doing jobs on my own which are clearly better suited to be done by two people. I would not recommend building a greenhouse this size on your own, but as you can see, it is possible in a pinch. The very last task was to prep the soil for planting. We decided to have a U-shaped bed on the inside, so I added a permanent rectangular box to form a short pathway and filled this with bark chips. For making the plant beds, I had a combination of mushroom and horse manure compost delivered, which I put through a makeshift sieve before filling up the greenhouse. Before filling it up, I covered the grass with a layer of thick cardboard boxes. This I got from Halford, so you can see that these are bicycle boxes. They're just that little bit thicker. The combination of the cardboard and the 10 centimeter thick layer of compost that I'm putting on blocks out 100% of the light to the lawn below, so it makes it impossible for it to grow through. There is no need to turn the lawn or to remove it, and definitely no need to spray any chemical weed killers. Simply cover it so well that you starve it from light and it will die naturally.
Well, that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching. Send it around to your gardening friends. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, goodbye.